Every night, my husband went into our daughter's room. One night, I set up a camera, and what I saw shattered me. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. Every night, I noticed him walking down the hall. David, calm and deliberate, heading toward Emily's room. At first, I told myself it was normal, a father checking on his daughter before she fell asleep. But something about the quiet, the way he lingered just a moment too long, left a strange weight in my chest. I would sit in the living room pretending to read, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Every small sound became amplified, the soft click of the hallway light, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the clock. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare voice aloud. Was I imagining it, or was there something I was missing? Sleep became restless. My thoughts circled endlessly. Memories of Emily's quiet smiles, her soft laughter, her hesitant words when David was near. I noticed how she sometimes hesitated at the top of the stairs, or how she would pause before opening her bedroom door. Little things, easily dismissed, but enough to plant a seed of worry I could no longer ignore. One night, I stayed on the sofa longer than usual. The house was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes you aware of every heartbeat. I told myself I was being overly cautious, but the feeling didn't fade. My heart tightened, my thoughts tangled. Something in me knew I needed clarity, even if the truth might be uncomfortable. By morning, I had made a quiet decision. I would find a way to understand what was happening, to observe without intruding, to see for myself, even if it meant watching silently from the shadows. I thought of small ways to notice, to measure, to hold myself steady in the uncertainty. Even as he kissed me goodnight and drifted down the hall, I felt my pulse quicken. Every step he took, every pause in the darkened hallway, echoed louder than it should have. I didn't yet know what I might find. I only knew that my role as a mother, protective, watchful, unwavering, was awakening in ways I hadn't expected. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay calm, to keep observing. The house was quiet, yes, but my mind was alive with questions and possibilities. That night, I realized that some truths don't announce themselves. They linger in small, uneasy moments, in the spaces between words, in the silence of a hallway. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that heavy, slow weight of anticipation settling into my chest, waiting for what was yet to come. The days that followed felt heavier than the nights. Every small detail about our home, our routines, even our laughter, seemed tinged with uncertainty. I found myself noticing things I had ignored before. The way Emily sometimes hesitated at the staircase, or how she paused before answering a simple question. Nothing concrete, nothing obvious, but enough to stir a quiet worry in me that refused to go away. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was just teenage moods, the natural distance between parent and child at 17. But a mother's intuition isn't something you can silence so easily. It sits in your chest, quietly tugging at your thoughts, whispering that something is off. And when you ignore it, it only grows louder, pressing against your calm like the weight of unseen shadows. Even in conversation, subtle changes caught my attention. Emily's smiles were a fraction slower, her laughter softer, almost hesitant. I noticed her flinching at the sound of sudden movement, or her fingers curling tightly around her notebook when she thought no one was watching. These moments were fleeting, almost invisible to anyone else. But to me they felt like signals, quiet pulses of unease. At night, I would lie awake, imagining every possibility. turning scenarios over in my mind with a careful, deliberate intensity. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle in her room set my heart racing. I felt a strange mixture of fear and determination, a pull to protect, to watch, to understand, without yet knowing what I might see. I began small experiments, ways to observe without intruding. Sitting quietly in the living room, pretending to read, I would watch the hallway. I paid attention to the smallest movements, the pauses, the shifts in the familiar rhythm of our home. The tension was subtle but constant, a quiet hum in the background of daily life that refused to be ignored. By the end of each day, my mind was heavy with reflection. I thought about the years David and I had shared, the trust we had built, and the fragile nature of perception. Could I be reading too much into nothing? Or was my intuition sharpening me for something I needed to see? The questions lingered, unanswered, creating a quiet, almost unbearable suspense that settled in my chest each evening. I realized, slowly, that the world of family life isn't always as transparent as it seems. Behind closed doors, behind smiles and routine, there can be small truths that go unnoticed, tiny shifts in behavior that hint at something more. And as a mother, I understood that my role wasn't just to guide and nurture, but to observe, to sense, to notice the whispers of unease that others might miss. That awareness, that watchful, patient vigilance became my quiet armor. I didn't yet know the full story, but I knew I needed to be ready. The nights, the hallways, the soft sounds of our home, they were all part of a puzzle I had to solve, piece by careful piece. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of responsibility in a way that was sharp, clear, and unrelenting. The unease had become a constant hum in my chest. Each day, I found myself thinking of ways to understand what was happening in the spaces I couldn't reach. I wasn't ready to confront David, not yet. There was something in me that needed clarity first, a way to see without disturbing, to observe without alarm. I sat at the kitchen table one morning, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at the patterns of our home, the quiet of the house pressed against me, amplifying the small sounds. Emily moving about in her room, David humming softly as he read the newspaper. Every detail felt loaded, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets I hadn't yet learned. For the first time, I considered a more deliberate approach. I didn't know what I might find. The idea made my stomach twist, a mix of fear and determination I couldn't ignore. Could I really watch, hidden in the shadows of our home, waiting for a moment that might change everything? A mother's heart is resilient, but it's also fragile in ways that surprise you. Mine was teetering between courage and dread. I decided I had to act carefully. Not recklessly, not out of panic, but with precision. Every small observation, every pattern I had noted would guide my next step. I began thinking about where I could watch discreetly, how to be sure I could see without being seen. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, yet oddly empowering. I realized that protecting Emily wasn't just about being physically present. It was about understanding, anticipating, and preparing. That afternoon, I walked past Emily's room, glancing at the neatly arranged shelves, the stack of books beside her bed. I imagined small ways to observe, hidden angles that wouldn't be noticed, subtle methods that allowed me to remain invisible while still gathering the truth. My hands shook slightly as I made mental notes, but my mind was clear. This wasn't curiosity. It was a mother's duty, and I felt it sharpen every sense in my body. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay calm, and to move with patience. Every step, every decision had to be deliberate. The house, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a stage for something far more serious. Every creak, every muted sound became part of a puzzle I needed to solve. By evening, I had resolved on a plan. I would watch, quietly, from a place unseen, to know what was happening, to understand fully before acting. The thought made my chest tighten, but also ignited a fierce, protective energy. I knew the days ahead would require patience, courage, and careful vigilance. And I was ready, in the quiet, determined way that only a mother could be, to take the first step towards seeing the truth for myself. The decision weighed on me all day, a quiet, persistent pressure that I couldn't shake. Every small sound in the house seemed amplified. The soft creak of the stairs, the rustle of Emily's notebooks, the distant hum of the refrigerator. It was as if the walls themselves were urging me to act, to see, to understand. I knew I couldn't confront David yet, not without clarity. I needed to observe, to watch, to be certain before stepping into what might be the most difficult truth of my life. That afternoon, I found myself pacing slowly in Emily's room, tracing my fingers along the edges of her bookshelf, imagining a small, discreet camera hidden behind the rows of books and stuffed animals. My hands trembled slightly at the thought. The idea of watching her in her private space made my chest tighten. Yet beneath the anxiety was a sharp, unyielding resolve. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about protection, about understanding, about taking responsibility for my daughter's safety in a world I had thought I knew. I moved with deliberate care, imagining the angles, the placement, the way light fell in the corners of her room. Each decision mattered. Even a small mistake could ruin everything, alerting David or disturbing Emily. I felt the weight of that responsibility, heavy and almost suffocating, but I also felt a strange sense of empowerment. To act, even quietly, meant I was taking control where I'd only feared before. By evening, the house was quiet, the soft glow of the hallway light spilling into Emily's room. I placed the camera behind a row of dolls, carefully adjusting it so that it captured the space without being noticed. My hands shook, but my breathing remained steady, slow and deliberate. Every movement, every adjustment felt monumental, as if the small act of placing a camera could ripple across the fabric of our lives in ways I couldn't yet predict. Once it was done, I stepped back and studied the room from the doorway. It looked normal, ordinary, untouched. The room that had always been Emily's sanctuary now held a small, hidden witness. I reminded myself to stay calm, to maintain the quiet patience I had practiced over weeks of unease. The camera was only a tool, a means to clarity, not an end in itself. Sitting in the living room later that night, I felt the tension pressing against me like a low hum. The house was still, yet charged with expectation. Every footstep, every creak, every distant sound seemed magnified. I reminded myself to breathe, to wait, to let time reveal what I could not yet confront. The camera would capture the nights to come, and I would watch, quietly, patiently, as a mother who had learned that observation could be a shield, a safeguard, and a quiet form of power. I didn't yet know what I would see. I only knew that I had taken a step forward, a deliberate, measured action toward understanding. And in that decision, I felt a strange mixture of fear, anticipation, and the faintest glimmer of hope that in knowing the truth, I could finally begin to protect what mattered most. The night finally arrived. I sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The house was quiet still, holding its breath with me. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the remote, pressed play, and stared at the small screen, bracing myself for what I might see. At first, it was mundane. Emily sitting on her bed, reading quietly, humming a soft tune. David entering the hallway, the familiar rhythm of his steps. My heart thudded, tense and cautious. I told myself to breathe, to watch patiently, to let the camera capture what it needed to capture. But then, small, subtle things began to emerge. A pause here, a gesture there, a way Emily flinched at a sudden movement. Nothing explicit, nothing obvious yet, but enough to twist something deep in my chest. The weight of unease I had carried for weeks pressed heavier, sharper. My hands gripped the edge of the sofa, knuckles white, as I realized this wasn't simply my imagination. Something was off, something beneath the surface of our ordinary lives. David lingered longer than necessary, bending over Emily's desk as if to adjust a pen or tuck in a blanket. Emily's hands tightened around the book, her body tense, her eyes flicking to his in a way that made my chest ache. I watched, frozen, trying to interpret the subtle cues, the almost imperceptible shifts in her posture, in his behavior. It was as though the camera had captured a private rhythm of unease I had only felt, never seen, until now. I turned the volume down, not trusting myself to hear words I wasn't ready to face. Yet the silence was heavy, almost louder than any sound could be. The footage played on, revealing ordinary moments layered with tension, gestures that carried weight, movements that left me breathless. My heart raced, a slow, trembling beat that matched the anxiety building inside me. For hours I sat there, watching frame by frame. The unease I had sensed in Emily, the hesitation in her movements, the subtle dominance in David's posture, it all became painfully clear in the glow of the screen. I felt a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a growing clarity. My role as a mother wasn't simply to observe now. It was to protect, to act, to think through every choice with precision and care. I paused the footage, closed my eyes, and let my hands fall into my lap. The house was silent, yet I could still feel the tension lingering in the shadows, pressing against the walls, echoing in the spaces between us. I realized that clarity often comes in quiet increments, in fragments, in the small details that we notice only when we are truly paying attention. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't move. I simply sat, trembling slightly, aware of the responsibility that had now fully landed on my shoulders. The camera had given me a glimpse, a careful, fragile window into a reality I had only suspected. And with that glimpse came a quiet, unwavering determination. I would protect Emily. I would understand every detail, gather every piece, and prepare myself for the steps I would need to take. Even in fear, there was resolve. Even in uncertainty, there was focus. And in that fragile, trembling moment, I understood that the truth, once seen, cannot be ignored. The days that followed the first footage were unbearable. Every step David took in the house, every glance he cast toward Emily, felt loaded with an invisible weight I could no longer ignore. The quiet moments that once brought comfort now carried tension, a rhythm I had begun to recognize in pieces, small and unsettling. I found myself replaying the footage in my mind, dissecting every gesture, every pause, every sigh. Emily moved more cautiously now, almost unconsciously. She flinched at small noises, hugged her notebooks to her chest, and sometimes hesitated before answering even simple questions. I noticed the smallest changes in her posture, the way her shoulders stiffened for a fraction of a second, the way she would glance toward the door as if expecting something. Each detail, though subtle, spoke volumes to a mother who had spent years learning to read her child's silences. I began keeping notes, scribbling in a small notebook when I noticed patterns. David's habits, the timing of his nightly visits, Emily's reactions. Even the rhythm of their movements became part of a careful observation, a map of small, repeated behaviors that told a story more clearly than words ever could. The unease I had carried for weeks solidified into something concrete, a series of moments that formed a pattern I could no longer dismiss. At night, I would sit quietly in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating my notebook, heart racing yet steady with resolve. Every detail mattered now, every hesitation, every subtle movement. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but I knew that patience was essential. To act prematurely could risk everything. To be vigilant, to understand fully, was the only way to protect Emily while also preparing for the steps I would need to take. Even David's ordinary behaviors became part of this puzzle. The way he hovered a little too long over tasks in Emily's room, the way his voice softened in certain moments, the way his hands lingered longer than necessary on ordinary objects, each subtle act layered into the growing tapestry of concern. I didn't yet have clarity on the full truth, but the fragments were enough to sharpen my awareness and intensify my protective instincts. There was also a strange, cruel duality to it. David could be charming, even affectionate at times, and I realized that the contrast made the subtle unease even more difficult to dismiss. It was this duality that forced me to pay attention, to watch, to document. A mother's intuition isn't satisfied with partial truths. It demands understanding, requires clarity, and insists on action when the pieces finally fall into place. By the end of those nights, I understood the pattern. There were moments, small and fleeting, that whispered of control, of tension, of unease that Emily carried silently. My heart ached for her, yet alongside the ache was a quiet, determined strength. I would not wait any longer to protect her, and I would not allow the ordinary masks of our home to hide what I had begun to recognize. Even in silence, the story was becoming clear. I would continue to observe, to document, to prepare, and in the quiet of my own thoughts, I realized that the first step toward reclaiming safety, both for Emily and for myself, was vigilance, patience, and unwavering focus. The nights ahead would test me, but I felt a clarity I had never known before, sharp and relentless, guiding me toward the choices I would have to make. The nights became my vigil. I would sit quietly in the living room, a soft blanket draped over my shoulders, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the hallway, heart attuned to every footstep, every creak, every faint whisper of movement. The house, once familiar and comforting, now seemed layered with secrets, and I had taken it upon myself to observe, to understand, to notice the invisible threads woven into our daily life. Emily moved with a quiet caution that tugged at me in ways words could not capture. She would glance toward the hall with a flicker of hesitation, fingers fidgeting, posture stiffening for just a moment too long. These small, fleeting gestures, almost imperceptible to anyone else, were loud alarms to me. I had learned to read the silence, the spaces between words, the tiny hesitations that spoke louder than any conversation ever could. David continued his nightly routines with careful precision. His steps were measured, his voice soft and controlled. Yet beneath that ordinary facade, there were movements, gestures, and subtle tensions that set my instincts on edge. A hand lingering over a chair longer than necessary, a shadow crossing Emily's desk, a glance toward her bed that seemed to last an instant too long. Each one was a piece of the puzzle I was quietly assembling, a pattern emerging slowly but unmistakably. I reminded myself constantly to remain calm, to maintain patience. To act impulsively would have risked everything. I needed time, observation, clarity. Each night I became more attuned, more precise, cataloging every detail, every nuance, every moment that seemed slightly off-kilter. I was mapping the rhythm of our lives, noting where the ordinary slipped into something that needed attention. At times, I felt exhaustion pressing into my bones, the quiet strain of vigilance, the tension that comes from watching someone you love navigate hidden complexities. Yet alongside that weariness was a quiet strength, a determination sharpened by necessity. I would not allow Emily's subtle discomfort to go unnoticed. I would watch and I would understand until I had the clarity I needed to protect her. Even the smallest interactions carried weight. A conversation in the kitchen, a glance in the hallway, a whispered instruction, each was catalogued, considered, weighed. I began to notice patterns not just in movement, but in the quiet energy of the house itself, the subtle shifts that made ordinary moments feel charged. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, offering glimpses into the hidden currents of our family life. And through it all, Emily remained blissfully unaware that her mother was watching, noting, learning. She moved through her days with a delicate combination of innocence and quiet caution, a balance that made my heart ache even as it strengthened my resolve. I realized that vigilance was not merely about observation. It was an act of love, a commitment to presence, a promise that no subtle signal, no hidden discomfort, would go unnoticed. By the end of each night, I felt both drained and resolute. The shadows in the house held answers yet to be revealed, and I would continue to watch silently, patiently, for the moments that would demand understanding, that would show me what I needed to know, and that would guide me toward the decisions I would have to make to protect the child I loved above all else. The tension had built slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, until it pressed on me from every direction. I carried it like a weight in my chest, a quiet, unrelenting pressure that made ordinary tasks feel heavier than usual. Cooking dinner, folding laundry, sitting with Emily in the living room. All of it carried an undercurrent of unease I could not shake. Every glance David cast, every soft sound from the hallway, made my pulse quicken. I remember one night sitting in the corner of the living room, notebook in hand, hands trembling, and realizing how profoundly exhausted I had become. My eyes traced every shadow, every flicker of movement, every subtle shift in the rhythm of our home. The fear, the worry, the gnawing sense that something was not right, it all converged into a moment of sharp clarity. I could not ignore it any longer. My daughter's safety, her quiet hesitations, the patterns I had begun to notice. They demanded attention, demanded action. Tears came unexpectedly, slipping down my cheeks as I sat in silence. I thought about Emily's small, careful movements, the way she sometimes paused in the doorway, the way she hugged herself when she thought no one was watching. The weight of it all, the responsibility, the fear, the urgency, hit me fully, and I realized that patience alone was no longer enough. I needed to act, carefully and deliberately, but with full awareness that each step mattered, each choice carried consequences. I began to map out what I could do, quietly and methodically. The camera, placed carefully in Emily's room, would give me the clarity I needed. I would continue to observe, to document, to notice patterns that revealed the truth slowly, in fragments. But I also recognized that watching alone would not be enough. I needed to gather evidence, understand fully, and prepare for the moment when I would no longer be an observer, but a protector, ready to act decisively. Sleep became difficult. the quiet of the night pressing against me like a living thing. I would lie awake, heart thudding, mind racing, thinking through every possibility, every scenario. Could I be overreacting? Or had my instincts, honed over decades as a mother, finally aligned with a truth I could not yet see fully? The tension was suffocating, yet it sharpened my resolve. During the day, I held myself together for Emily. I smiled, guided her through homework, shared quiet conversations, all the while observing, noticing, interpreting. The duality of my life, the ordinary moments filled with love, the undercurrent of unease, the quiet vigilance, created a tension that was both exhausting and empowering. I felt every emotion deeply: fear, anxiety, love, determination. Each one fueled my resolve to protect her, no matter the cost. By the end of the week, I realized something crucial. The emotional breaking point was not about despair. It was about clarity. It was the moment when fear transformed into determination, when uncertainty became focus, when worry became a quiet, unyielding commitment to protect. I would not falter. I would watch, I would learn, I would prepare. And when the time came, I would act with the strength and precision that only a mother, fully awake to the truths around her, could summon. The house had begun to speak in ways I hadn't noticed before. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of a room, every faint rustle in Emily's room felt like a whisper of a story I needed to understand. The footage from the camera had revealed the beginnings of a pattern, subtle clues that piece by piece formed a quiet, insistent puzzle demanding attention. Emily's behavior had changed even more subtly than I had first noticed. She would sometimes sit on the edge of her bed, fingers intertwined, staring into nothing for a few moments longer than seemed normal. Small sighs would escape her lips, almost inaudible, as if carrying the weight of thoughts she didn't dare voice. She moved cautiously, with an alertness that made me ache inside, yet strengthened my resolve to understand, to protect, to prepare. David's actions, too, revealed themselves in tiny, almost imperceptible ways. A hand hovering over Emily's desk for a moment longer than necessary. A soft tone in his voice when speaking to her, gestures that seemed ordinary to anyone else. But to me, they carried a weight that could not be ignored. I began noticing patterns in the quietest moments, the briefest exchanges, and cataloging them carefully in my notebook. Every detail mattered. Every subtlety could be the key to understanding the reality I had begun to suspect. I began to watch more deliberately, timing my observations to match David's routines. The quiet moments at night, the small pauses in conversation, the way Emily's gaze would flicker toward him, all of it became part of a careful map I was constructing. My mind raced with questions, and yet I reminded myself to stay calm, to observe without jumping to conclusions, to allow the truth to reveal itself in small, undeniable fragments. Even ordinary daily life now felt charged with tension. Mealtimes, homework sessions, brief exchanges in the hallway, all were watched, noted, interpreted. The house itself seemed to hum with subtle signals, small currents of energy that spoke of hidden dynamics. I had become hyper-aware, attuned to nuances that had escaped me before. The ordinary rhythm of family life had shifted, revealing undercurrents I could not dismiss. There were moments that made my stomach tighten, subtle gestures that hinted at a reality far more complex than I had imagined. And yet, alongside the fear, a quiet determination had taken root. Observation was my armor, understanding my shield, and the meticulous notes I kept were my way of preparing for the action that might one day be necessary. I realized, in those quiet nights filled with careful watching, that clarity often comes in increments, It is in the accumulation of subtle clues, the patient stitching together of details, that the truth begins to emerge. The small pieces, almost invisible to anyone else, were speaking to me in a language only a mother could understand, a language of concern, vigilance, and unwavering love. By the end of the week, I felt both exhausted and empowered. The clues were there, scattered yet undeniable, and they were guiding me toward a full understanding of the home I thought I knew. My heart ached for Emily, but it also beat with resolve. The nights ahead would demand patience, courage, and clarity, and I was ready to watch, to wait, and to gather the pieces until the full picture revealed itself. The rain started that evening, soft at first, then steady, thin silver lines sliding down the kitchen window as I sat there, my tea gone cold. David was upstairs with Emily, helping her with something for school, or at least that's what he'd said. But I could hear the faint murmur of their voices through the vent above the stove. It wasn't what they were saying that held me still, it was the tone, the hesitation in Emily's voice, the smooth, coaxing rhythm of David's. I didn't want to eavesdrop. God knows I didn't, but sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission. It sneaks in, quiet and uninvited. So I listened, and the more I listened, the heavier my chest became. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to know that something about their closeness wasn't right anymore. It wasn't fatherly, it wasn't innocent. It was something blurred, something that made the air in that house feel too thick to breathe. That night, I stood in the hallway, lights off, watching the soft glow from Emily's room. She was sitting on the floor, drawing, her small lamp casting a trembling circle of gold around her. David walked in, leaned against the doorframe, smiling. To anyone else, it would look like a sweet father-daughter moment. But to me, that smile felt off, too deliberate, too heavy. When Emily noticed me standing there, her eyes widened slightly. Not in fear, in warning, as if she was saying, "Please don't." I stepped away. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, I went to my room, shut the door, and stared at the footage from the hidden camera again. The camera didn't lie. It didn't exaggerate. It just showed what it saw. Tiny things that human eyes might miss. The brush of his hand on her shoulder lasting a second too long. The way she flinched when he spoke sharply, then forced a smile. It's strange how the truth reveals itself not in grand moments, but in shadows, small movements, faint glances, unfinished sentences. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that maybe grief had twisted my judgment. But every time I told myself that, something deeper inside whispered, "No, Maggie." You know, I started locking my bedroom door at night, not because I was afraid of David, but because I needed space to think, to breathe, to plan. The weight of pretending grew heavier each day. He still kissed me goodnight, still poured me coffee in the morning, still smiled like the man I'd loved for 20 years. But behind those gestures, there was something else, a darkness wearing the face of familiarity. Emily avoided him when she could. I saw it in how she lingered near me, how she'd choose the kitchen over her room, how she'd startle when she heard his footsteps in the hallway. I wanted to pull her close, tell her she was safe, but the words stuck in my throat. Because safety, I realized, was something I could no longer promise, not until I knew everything. That night, as I turned off the lamp and lay in bed, the sound of the rain grew louder. It felt like the house was crying with me, and in that darkness, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow I'll find the truth, no matter how much it hurts." The next morning, the world looked washed clean after the rain, but inside the house, everything still felt stained. I moved through the kitchen like a ghost, trying to appear normal. David hummed as he made pancakes, pretending nothing was wrong. Emily sat at the table, her fork motionless, eyes lowered. There was a kind of silence between us that said more than words ever could. I kept my voice steady, pretending to be the same wife and mother I'd always been. But inside me, something was winding tighter, ready to break. After they left for school and work, I sat alone at the table, staring at my untouched breakfast. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, opening the hidden camera app. The night before, I'd placed a small new device in the corner of Emily's room, a second camera. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to watch what it might reveal, but I knew I didn't have a choice anymore. I hit play. At first, it was just normal. Emily reading on her bed, music playing softly. Then David entered, his voice calm, patient. He sat beside her, said something I couldn't quite make out. She shook her head. He reached for her shoulder. I froze. Every instinct in me screamed to stop watching, but I couldn't look away. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't violent in the way people imagine. It was subtle, poisonous, disguised as care. He was scolding her, telling her it was for her own good, calling it discipline, calling it love, and then, the moment that shattered me, Emily's small voice, trembling as she whispered, "Please, Daddy." "I'll be good." I dropped the phone. My whole body went cold. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down, to run upstairs and hold her so tight she'd never have to be afraid again. But for a long moment I couldn't move. The sound of her fear echoed in my chest until it became a pulse I could no longer ignore. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. The fog of denial cleared, and what I saw was evil. Quiet, smiling, patient evil, living in my home. I picked up the phone again, my hand shaking so hard the screen blurred. I saved the video, backed it up, twice. Then I stared at David's contact name and thought about how many years I'd trusted him, loved him, defended him. When they came home that afternoon, I acted calm. I smiled when he asked how my day was. I hugged Emily tighter than usual. I told her she could sleep in my room that night. She didn't ask why, she just nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. Later, when David went to shower, I sat at my desk and emailed the footage to myself, labeling it with one word, proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the shower upstairs felt endless, like the world was waiting for me to make a choice. And deep down, I knew tomorrow would not be just another day. Tomorrow, I would stop pretending. Tomorrow, I would fight back. That night felt endless. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, every second scraping against my nerves. Emily had fallen asleep beside me, curled up under the blanket, her small hand gripping mine like she was afraid I'd disappear. I watched her chest rise and fall, and I thought about how many nights she must have lain awake, waiting for someone to protect her. The guilt tore through me, sharp and merciless. I had been blind for too long. Down the hall, I could hear David moving around in our bedroom, his footsteps, his humming, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Ordinary noises that suddenly felt sinister. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. I sat there staring at the door, knowing that the man I had shared a life with wasn't who I thought he was. The evidence was there. The video was real. The voice of my little girl begging for mercy still rang inside me. There was no more pretending. When the house finally went still, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emily. I walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. My reflection passed in the dark glass of the family photos, images of a perfect family that never truly existed. I stopped at our bedroom door and stood there, listening. David was lying in bed, his phone glowing faintly in his hand. I pushed the door open. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, couldn't sleep?" His voice was calm, almost kind. That's what made it worse. Monsters don't always growl. They speak gently, smile softly, and hide behind familiar eyes. I didn't answer. I just stood there, holding my phone, the video already open on the screen. My hand was trembling, but my voice, when it came, was steady. "I know, David. I saw everything." He froze. The warmth drained from his face, leaving behind something cold and calculating. "What are you talking about?" he asked too quickly. I walked closer, holding the phone out. "Don't lie to me." "Not now." He reached out, tried to take the phone from me, but I pulled it back. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt like glass, thin and ready to shatter. Then he laughed, low, bitter, cruel. "You don't understand. I'm her father. She needs discipline. You've always been too soft." Something in me broke then. The woman who had spent years making excuses for his temper, his moods, his control, she was gone. I stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "You hurt her," I said quietly. "You don't get to call that love." His face twisted with rage, but I didn't flinch. I turned and walked out before he could speak again, locking the door to Emily's room behind me. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number I'd been avoiding all day, Child Protection Services. My voice cracked when I spoke, but the words finally came out. "I need to report something. My husband, my daughter, I have proof." When I hung up, I sat on the floor beside Emily's bed, holding her hand while she slept. The tears came then, silent and endless. But beneath the heartbreak, there was something else rising in me, a quiet, fierce strength. Because that night, I didn't just confront a monster. I freed us from him. The morning sunlight didn't feel warm that day. It poured through the curtains like a spotlight on everything I had tried to hide. I hadn't slept, not for a second. I just sat there beside Emily, listening to her soft breathing, waiting for the knock that would change everything. My phone was still on the nightstand, the call history proof of what I'd done. I'd reported my own husband. At 8 a.m., there was a sound at the door, firm, deliberate. I stood up slowly, my legs heavy as if the floor had turned to sand. Emily stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Mom?" she whispered. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly, brushing her hair from her face. "Just stay here, okay? I'll be right back." When I opened the front door, 2 police officers stood there, their expressions steady and professional. Behind them was a woman from Child Protective Services. She was gentle-eyed, holding a clipboard and a quiet sadness that told me she'd seen too much of this world's ugliness. "Maggie Thompson?" the officer asked. I nodded. "You called last night?" "Yes," I whispered. "He's upstairs." They stepped inside. The sound of their radios crackled against the silence of my house. One of them asked me to stay with the social worker while the other went up the stairs. I could hear the footsteps, the slow creak of wood, then David's voice, angry, sharp, demanding to know what was happening. I didn't move. I just sat at the kitchen table, my hands folded, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Emily came to the doorway, her small body trembling. The social worker crouched beside her, voice soft as she said, "You're safe now, honey." And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in Emily's eyes that I hadn't seen in weeks. Relief. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She just stood there, quiet and still, as if she finally understood that someone had listened. Someone had believed her without her needing to say a word. A few minutes later, the officers came down with David in handcuffs. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with fury. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. "You'll regret this, Maggie," he said through gritted teeth. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. They took him away, and the door closed behind them with a sound that felt both final and freeing. For a long while the house was utterly silent. I turned to Emily, and she ran into my arms, her small body shaking against me. I held her tight, pressing my lips to her hair, whispering, "It's over, baby. It's finally over." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. It wasn't really over. Healing doesn't come with handcuffs or police reports. It comes in slow, painful pieces, day by day. Later that morning, when the house was empty except for us, I sat in the same kitchen chair where I'd watched everything fall apart. The mug of cold coffee still sat where I'd left it the night before. Outside, the world went on, birds singing, cars passing, sunlight glinting off wet leaves, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I looked at Emily, drawing quietly at the table, her crayons scratching softly across the paper. Her picture was simple, 2 stick figures hand in hand under a bright yellow sun. No darkness, no shadows, just light. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find that light again. The house was unbearably quiet after they took David away. You'd think silence would bring peace, but it didn't. It felt heavy, like a fog that settled on every corner, every picture frame, every memory that used to mean something good. I could still smell his aftershave in the hallway, hear the echo of his footsteps on the stairs. Every sound reminded me that he had been here, and that now he was gone, not by accident, but because I chose to make him leave. That morning, I tried to keep myself busy. I made pancakes for Emily, even though I hadn't eaten properly in days. She sat at the table, poking at her food, her small hands trembling every now and then. When she looked at me, there was confusion behind her eyes, love, fear, and something I couldn't quite name. I reached out and touched her cheek. "It's okay, baby," I whispered. "You don't have to be scared anymore." She nodded, but didn't say anything. She hadn't said much since last night, and maybe I didn't expect her to. I cleaned the living room next, gathering the pieces of a life that didn't exist anymore. The family photos, the wedding picture, the framed certificate David got from work. I placed them all in a box. My hands shook as I sealed it shut. I didn't cry. The tears had stopped coming. I think I'd cried all I could. What was left was something quieter, deeper, like grief mixed with exhaustion. By noon, the social worker came back for a visit. Her name was Karen. She sat across from me, her notepad open but her eyes kind. She spoke softly, explaining the next steps, what the court would do, how long David might be held. I nodded through every word, trying to absorb it all, but my mind felt distant, like my body was there, but my heart was somewhere far away. Karen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Maggie, you did the right thing," she said. "You protected your daughter. That's something not everyone has the strength to do." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel brave. But all I could think about was how I'd slept beside that man for years, shared meals with him, built a home with him, and never truly saw the monster he was becoming. After Karen left, the afternoon light started to fade. I sat by the window, watching Emily play with her dolls on the living room rug. She was humming softly to herself, lost in her small world. For a moment I saw a flicker of peace on her face, something fragile and new. And then I realized this silence wasn't just pain. It was also space. Space for healing, for breathing, for beginning again. As night fell, I tucked Emily into bed. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, whispering, "Mommy, will he come back?" I swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart," I said. "He's not coming back. Not ever. She looked at me for a long moment, then closed her eyes. Her breathing steadied, soft and even, until she fell asleep. I stayed by her side, my hand resting on her blanket, my heart aching with both loss and relief. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentle, almost forgiving. For the first time, I didn't feel like the silence was punishing me. It was holding me, teaching me how to listen to the sound of peace I'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow would bring questions, maybe court dates, maybe gossip. But tonight there was only quiet. And that quiet, heavy as it was, finally felt like a kind of freedom. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, a strange mix of life and history. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat as Karen and I walked through the echoing hallway. Emily was with my sister that day. I couldn't bring her here. She didn't need to see any of this. Karen stayed beside me, calm and grounded. "Just remember," she whispered, "you're not the one on trial here." I nodded, clutching my purse tighter, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wasn't afraid of David anymore. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the thought of seeing him again after everything, it stirred something deep and heavy in my stomach. When they called the case, I stood. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. The walls seemed to close in around me. David sat across the room in that gray county jumpsuit, his hands folded, his eyes searching for me. The look he gave me wasn't anger anymore. It was confusion, maybe disbelief. Like he still couldn't understand how I had found the courage to stand against him. The judge spoke in a calm, detached tone, reading through the charges: child endangerment, assault, domestic abuse. Each word landed like a stone in the quiet room. I could hear my own breath, the shuffle of papers, the low hum of the ceiling lights. Then it was my turn. The prosecutor asked me to describe what I'd seen. My voice trembled at first, but Karen was there, just a few seats away, her eyes steady, grounding me. I took a breath and began, not in anger, not even in grief, but in truth. I told them how I had noticed the changes in Emily, the way she flinched when he entered the room, the way her laughter faded from our home. I told them about the night I watched that footage, about how my world shattered and how silence no longer felt like safety. I didn't look at David once. I couldn't. When I finished, the room was still. The judge nodded slowly and the prosecutor thanked me. My knees felt weak, but I stayed standing. I wanted the truth to linger, not as pain, but as proof that I had done something right. David's attorney tried to speak, something about stress, about discipline gone too far. But it didn't matter. Everyone in that room could feel the difference between discipline and cruelty. When the session ended, I walked out quietly. The sun was pouring through the glass doors, blinding after the dim courtroom light. Karen placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. I swallowed, trying to find my voice. "I don't feel strong," I whispered. "That's because strength doesn't feel like power," she said. "It feels like survival." We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. The courthouse behind me, the open air ahead. I took a long breath, the kind that reaches your bones. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the road. Healing had no timeline, and forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to earn its place. But as I stepped out into that sunlight, I realized something simple and true. The truth doesn't just set you free. It steadies your feet, reminds you who you are, and teaches you that even after the darkest night, there's always a morning worth standing for. The days after the court hearing felt both empty and endless. The house was quieter now, but the silence wasn't heavy like before. It was softer, almost gentle, like the first breath after a storm. Still, I didn't know how to fill it. Every corner of our home carried traces of what had been broken. Emily's laughter didn't echo the same way. My hands trembled every time I reached for the camera I'd once used to uncover the truth. It had been my weapon, my salvation, and now it just sat there, lifeless, like a reminder of the war we'd survived. Karen visited often. She never came empty-handed. Sometimes she brought books for Emily, sometimes just a quiet smile. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to say much. Her presence alone steadied a room. One afternoon, she sat across from me at the kitchen table while Emily colored nearby. "Maggie," she said gently, "I've arranged therapy sessions for you both. It'll help you process things together at your own pace." I hesitated. Therapy had always sounded like something for other people, people who didn't know how to hold themselves together. But I looked at Emily, her small fingers gripping a blue crayon, the way she drew a sun that looked too big for the paper. And I realized, maybe we both needed space to learn how to live again. Our first session was quiet. The therapist, a kind woman named Diane, spoke softly, asking gentle questions that I didn't know how to answer. Emily stayed close to me, half hidden behind her stuffed bunny. Diane didn't push. She just listened. Sometimes silence was the best response, and maybe that was what we both needed. Someone who could sit in that silence without fear. Week by week, things began to shift. Emily started talking again. Little things at first. What she liked to eat, how she missed her school friends, how she hated the dark. She even began sleeping in her own room again, though I still left the door open just in case she called my name. And me? I started breathing differently, slower, deeper, like I wasn't afraid of my own heartbeat anymore. Karen would check in after every session. "You're doing beautifully," she'd tell me, and I'd almost believe her. She once said something that stayed with me. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting, Maggie. It means learning how to live in peace with what you've survived." Some nights I'd stand by Emily's door and watch her sleep. The moonlight would spill across her face, and she'd look peaceful, untouched by the nightmares that had once ruled her little world. I'd whisper a prayer then, not for revenge, not even for closure, but for grace. Grace to keep going, grace to forgive myself for not seeing sooner. It wasn't easy. Some mornings I'd still wake up with that tightness in my chest, the ghost of David's voice echoing in the corners of my mind. But then Emily would run into my arms, her laughter light and real, and I'd remember why I'd fought so hard. We weren't broken anymore, just mending, one honest day at a time. By the end of that month, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive again, with the smell of pancakes, the sound of crayons scratching, and the kind of quiet that finally felt like peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was rebuilding, and I was doing it with her. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. The kind of knock that makes your stomach twist before your mind even catches up. Emily was upstairs, humming softly to herself while arranging her dolls. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the door, half expecting Karen. She often stopped by around this time. But when I opened it, my breath caught. Standing there was David. He looked different, thinner. His eyes were hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in months. For a long moment, we just stood there. Two people who had once shared everything, now separated by everything that had gone wrong. "Maggie," he said quietly, "I just wanted to see Emily." His voice trembled slightly, but it didn't soften me. There was a time when hearing him say my name could undo me. Now it just felt strange, like a song I used to love but no longer remembered the words to. I didn't move. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice calm but steady. The court had made it clear, supervised visits only. He nodded, looking down at the ground. "I know," he whispered. I needed to apologize. Not to make excuses, not to ask for anything. I just needed you to hear it." For a moment the world felt painfully still. The wind rustled through the trees, and I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock behind me. I thought about slamming the door. I thought about the nights I'd spent crying in the dark, the way Emily used to scream when his shadow passed too close. But then I thought about what Karen had said, that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me, so I stepped out onto the porch, crossing my arms. "Say what you came to say," I told him. His eyes lifted, wet with regret. "I destroyed everything good in my life," he said softly. "And I can't undo it. I hurt you. I hurt her. I was lost, angry. I don't expect you to forgive me, Maggie. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man who had betrayed me. I saw someone broken by his own choices, someone who had to live with the wreckage he caused. "You should leave now," I said quietly. "Emily doesn't need to see you like this." He nodded, his shoulders slumped. "Can you at least tell her that I love her?" I hesitated. "She knows her father exists," I said, "but love isn't a word she understands from you yet. Maybe one day when she's ready." His eyes glistened, and he turned to go. As he reached the gate, he stopped. "You're stronger than I ever was," he said, voice breaking. "Take care of her." When the door closed behind me, I leaned against it, my heart pounding. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Instead, I felt an unexpected stillness inside me, like something that had been locked up for years had finally exhaled. That evening, I watched the sunset from the porch. The sky was streaked with gold and pink, soft and forgiving. Emily came out, her little hand slipping into mine. "Mommy, who was that man?" she asked. I took a breath and said, "Just someone from the past, sweetheart. Someone who doesn't belong in our world anymore." She nodded, resting her head against my arm. As the light faded, I realized that closure doesn't always come with grand gestures or perfect words. Sometimes it arrives in quiet moments, a knock at dusk, a conversation that doesn't reopen the wound, but finally lets it heal. The weeks that followed David's visit felt strangely calm, like the silence after a storm that nearly tore your home apart. I started noticing small things again. The sound of birds in the morning, the way sunlight spilled across Emily's drawings on the fridge, the smell of lavender from the candle Karen had gifted me months ago. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of peace. Every Thursday, Emily and I would go to therapy together. The room was warm, painted in soft shades of blue, with a round table in the middle where a small bowl of pebbles sat. Our therapist, Dr. Lane, had a gentle smile, the kind that didn't force comfort but invited it. She'd ask Emily to pick a pebble that showed how she felt each day. Some days Emily picked the bright yellow one, happy. Other days she reached for the gray one, confused. But she was talking. That was something. One afternoon as we sat together, Dr. Lane asked Emily what made her feel safe now. Emily thought for a long time before saying, "When Mommy sings in the kitchen." My throat tightened. It wasn't the kind of answer I expected, but hearing it, I realized healing wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it was hidden in the simplest gestures, a song, a bedtime story, a quiet meal shared at the table. After that session, I took Emily for ice cream. She picked strawberry, she always did. I watched her giggle, The pink of the ice cream smeared on her cheeks, and felt something shift inside me. The guilt I'd been carrying, for not seeing the signs earlier, for not protecting her sooner, began to loosen its hold. I had spent so long blaming myself for what happened that I forgot healing was also part of motherhood. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up even when you were broken too. That night, after putting Emily to bed, I found myself standing by the window. The moonlight spread across the yard, soft and forgiving. I thought about David again, not with anger this time, but with distance. He was no longer part of our story, not really. His chapter had closed the day he walked away, and I realized I didn't need revenge or even forgiveness to move forward. I just needed to keep building this quiet, steady life for the both of us. Later, I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since everything fell apart. I wrote, "We are healing," not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. As I closed the book, I felt the weight of the past finally begin to lift. In the morning, Emily ran to me, her tiny arms wrapping around my waist. "Mommy," she said, her voice full of sunshine, "can we plant flowers today?" I smiled, brushing her hair away from her face. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "I think it's time we start planting new things." Outside, the air smelled like rain and renewal. As we dug into the soil, our hands dirty and hearts lighter, I knew we were both learning something vital. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a garden we'd keep tending, one day at a time. It was a Sunday morning in early spring when the past found its way back to my doorstep. The air smelled of wet grass and coffee, and Emily was sitting on the floor with her crayons, drawing a house with a bright red roof. I was folding laundry, half humming, half lost in thought, when I heard the soft thud of an envelope sliding under the door. No knock this time, just that small sound that made my stomach turn, like an echo from another life. I walked over and picked it up. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name written in David's handwriting. A handwriting I used to know better than my own. My first instinct was to throw it away, to protect the quiet we had built so carefully. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, made me open it. Inside was a short letter and a folded drawing. The letter was shaky, smudged in places, as if written through tears. "Maggie," it began, "I'm in a recovery program now. It's not easy and it's not fast, but I'm trying. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that I'm getting help. I've been sober for 8 months. I see things clearly now. What I lost, what I destroyed, and what I can never get back. I hope you and Emily are safe. That's all I ever wanted, even when I didn't know how to show it." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I opened the folded paper. It was a crayon drawing. A man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands under a blue sky. Emily's drawing style from when she was younger. I realized he must have taken it from the old house before everything fell apart. He'd kept it all this time. Something twisted inside me. Not love, not pity, just an ache for how things could have been if he hadn't gone so far. That afternoon, I sat with Karen on the porch and told her about the letter. She listened quietly, nodding the way she always did, never judging, just being there. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. I looked at the envelope lying on the table between us. "Nothing," I said softly. "He's not part of our lives anymore. But I hope he means what he wrote." Karen reached for my hand. "You don't owe him anything, Maggie," she said gently. "Not forgiveness, not a response. Healing doesn't mean reopening the door." I nodded, letting her words settle. She was right. Sometimes peace isn't found in mending. It's found in letting go. That evening, Emily came up to me holding her new drawing. "Mommy, look! It's us planting flowers!" She had drawn herself and me, smiling under a sky full of tiny hearts. I looked at her picture, at the way she'd drawn our hands almost touching but not quite, and it felt like a perfect reflection of where we were. Still reaching, still healing, but free. Later, I tucked Emily into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're my brave girl." As I turned off the light, I felt the envelope still lying on the kitchen table behind me. It no longer scared me. It was just a piece of paper, a small ghost of the past, powerless in the face of the new life we had built. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady. I stood by the window for a long time, watching it fall, thinking about how sometimes closure doesn't arrive with big answers. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the decision to not look back anymore. Spring melted into summer, and life slowly found its rhythm again. The days grew warmer, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass, and laughter began to fill the house in a way I hadn't heard in years. Emily's giggles would echo down the hallway as she ran through the sprinklers in the yard, her curls sticking to her cheeks, her joy unfiltered and pure. Watching her like that, I often caught myself thinking how far we'd come, from a house full of secrets to a home filled with light. I had started teaching again, part-time at the local community center. Nothing grand, just art classes for children, helping them paint, draw, and sometimes just express what words couldn't. It was peaceful work, healing in its own quiet way. And every time I saw a child smile as they dipped their brush into color, I felt a tiny piece of myself return, the part that once believed in gentle things. One evening, I was cleaning up after class when Karen stopped by with 2 cups of coffee. "You look lighter," she said, setting one down in front of me. I smiled. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's strange. For the first time in so long, I'm not waiting for the next storm." Karen nodded knowingly. "That's what peace feels like," she said softly. "It sneaks in when you finally stop running from yourself." Later that night, I sat on the porch, the same place where so many tears had once fallen. Emily was asleep upstairs, her soft snores drifting through the open window. The moon hung low, the crickets sang, and I felt still. Not broken, not bitter, just still. My mind wandered to David for a brief second. I didn't know where he was or whether his recovery had lasted, but I silently wished him peace too. Because holding on to anger felt like drinking poison and expecting the other person to hurt. I was done with that kind of pain. Inside, on the kitchen wall, Emily's new painting hung proudly. 2 figures, me and her, holding hands beneath a sky of bright orange and gold. At the bottom, in her wobbly handwriting, she had written, "Me and Mommy, safe." It was simple, but it said everything. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes, healing doesn't come in waves. It comes in whispers. In tiny moments of peace that remind us we're still here, still capable of love, still growing. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.